right here. Oh, I have a cold open. Oh, I have a whole thing I'm going to do. Hold on here. All right, let's rock and roll.
Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1545 of Toronto Mic'd. Proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the tastes of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Learn how to plan, invest, and live smarter with the Raymond James The Advantaged Investor Podcast. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making her Toronto Mike debut, is Gemini award-winning journalist and author of the new book, At a Loss for Words, Conversation in the Age of Rage. It's Carol Off. Welcome, Carol.
Hello, Mike.
Nice to meet you.
That was quite the introduction.
Well, listen, only I bring out the big guns when Carol Off. Gemini Award. Where is that Gemini Award right now?
Oh, it's sitting on a shelf just in range of when I do a Zoom call, you know. Oh, is that in the frame? I didn't intend that to be there. Yes, it's right there.
Okay, now where are your husband's Geminis? He's got more than you.
He's got many.
It's not a contest, but
I also have him in my Zoom frame. I don't answer any questions about that.
You know, people just Zoom with Carol Off and they see, 11 Geminis,
Yes.
and they're just going to make natural assumptions.
Absolutely. What can I do about that? That's their assumptions.
That's not deceiving. That's just, you're just.
It's not fake news.
If they ask you any follow-up questions, you'll be honest.
I will.
So, Carol, okay, today, I literally, now it's about 10:23, but a couple hours ago, I dropped my youngest off at school, and I noticed yesterday that I felt, and I haven't been in school since the 90s, but I felt this back-to-school anxiety. I'm wondering, do you feel this? Like, is this just a Mike thing, or even if you're out of school, somehow the Labor Day, there's this back-to-school vibe?
Yeah, I've been going back to school, back to work every Labor Day since I was 5, and maybe younger. And I have to say, when I finally left the CBC 2 years ago, the thing I thought about most was that when it came to Labor Day or the day after Labor Day, I was not going to have to be anywhere, and that was the most exciting possibility for me.
But are you teaching at Western?
I did a semester last year based on the words.
Yeah.
They were interested in that. So I did that with the kids. Yeah.
Okay, that was Endangered Words, and that was at Western School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities. And that was all about your new book. So we're going to get into it, but I had a copy, and now I have like a hardcover copy, and I'm promised you're going to sign this before you disappear after this chat. But this is called At a Loss for Words, Conversation in an Age of Rage. And we're going to totally get into it. But because it's your Toronto Mike debut, I got a song for us. Although I did see that you were just on As It Happens, maybe last week.
This last night I was on As It Happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say,
Which
it's been a
weird.
while, but what's it like returning to As It Happens?
It was totally weird. It was, well, first of all, because it's my studio I was returning to. I spent 16 years in, and yet I'm on the other side of the table being interviewed by Neil Coxall, who's now the host.
And how's she doing?
She's great. She was wonderful. She thought it was just as weird as me, but we really got into it. It was emotional. I haven't thought a lot about As It Happened since I left, but I sure thought about it a lot last night.
So, Carol, as we set the table here, and before we get into the book and why you wrote the book, and I have some questions about the book, could we just rewind a little bit? Can we, because you spent 16 years hosting CBC Radio 1's As It Happens, but can we go back, like maybe help me understand how you get there? So that was the 16 years of your life. We'll get into like why you left, but can you give us a vibe of like what made you want to be a journalist?
I'm not sure I ever did want to be a journalist. I don't recall ever making that choice.
Well, then you made a huge mistake.
I
Carol.
did. I'm still trying to figure it out.
So, but you went. I know you wrote for the, speaking of the University of Western Ontario, you wrote for the Gazette there, right? Like, so
That's right.
so you're going to school, and I don't know, I won't age you, but early 80s, let's say, and somehow that gets you to As It Happens. So, can you help me just fill in the blanks there?
Well, when I was in university, the Gazette was always around, and I thought it was awful. And I remember a friend saying to me one day, "Well, if you think it's so bad, you should just go and work for them.
Yeah,
and
do something about
do
it.
something about it." And so
Good
I
advice.
thought, okay. And so I joined, and then I became just as arrogant as they were about how wonderful we were, and that it was one of those places where we thought we were pretty great. And I think we could have learned a bit from following other news agencies. But mostly, I mean, as far as how did that happen between that and As It Happens,
Sure.
I remember at the time thinking when I got the job at As It Happens that if someone had told me back in university when I was listening to As It Happens and Barbara Frum all the time, if someone had ever said to me, one day you will be in that chair hosting it, if they'd said, one day you will walk on Mars, I would
That's
have
more
thought,
likely.
well, it's possible. But one day I would host As It Happens and I'd sit where Barbara Frum sat. It would be impossible. And there I was.
So why is that? I, similarly would have thought I'd have a better chance of walking on Mars than hosting a podcast, merely because I thought I had a terrible voice and hated my voice. And I figured, well, I can write maybe, but not ever speak into a microphone. But what was it that you couldn't even fathom that you might one day, be on national airwaves like As It Happens?
Do you think I have a terrible voice?
No, you have a great voice. That's my. So what is it that you dared to dream?
I don't think I ever dared to dream of being on that show. It just wouldn't be possible. But I fell into the whole business of journalism by traveling, and I just had a nose for news. And so I'd find things, and whether it was Pakistan or Africa or wherever I was traveling, and I would think, okay, that's a story. And then before I know it, I was reporting on it and then getting gigs for that, and then finally hired by the CBC to do just that.
So basically between the Gazette, which is, the student newspaper there, and being a staff writer there, and then CBC coming and saying, hey, we have a gig for you. Is there any other professional outlets that you were, working as a journalist for in that period?
I did. I wrote for some newspapers. I had no intention during the first 7-8 years of being a journalist. I was trying to be a novelist, and but I was pathetic. I really sucked at fiction. Making things up just was not my bag, and so I realized that life is more surprising than anything that I have in my imagination. And so eventually I figured maybe this is really what I should be doing. Well, I'll just give you one story about that. I was I had done something. I'd done this story from Pakistan I had, and I wrote it up, and there was a kind of an alternative arts publication. They wanted something offbeat, so I wrote it for them, and they said, well, this isn't really very good. Can you write it again? And so I rewrote it, I don't know how many times, and they said, it's getting worse. and they were going to pay me $50 for that. And so finally I said, well, they said, look, you're just hopeless at this. And so give it up. And so anyway, and then I said, well, I'm not going to just throw this away. So I contacted Maclean's magazine and said, can I just submit this to you? And they said, sure. And I did. And they said, this is great. Can we pay you $500 for it?
Hey, that's 10 times the price.
And so I thought, okay, I think this is where I'm going to go.
Smart. So you're basically doing good work. And did you apply for a job at the CBC?
No, never. I just started freelancing for them. And my theory was that I wasn't going to start at the bottom and just hope that somebody gave me a better job. I just freelanced and rode my bike everywhere because I couldn't afford the subway, and just parked myself on doorways of shows I wanted to work for and said, I'm not going away till you let me work for you. And eventually they did.
See, sometimes that works for you. When you're Carol off, that works. And sometimes they call security and you're banned from the building.
Well, at the time, I wasn't, as you go, Carol off. I was just some hopeless girl on a bike.
But there's no shame in that game. I will say, you could right now, and hopefully you do before you leave, you give me $1 million, and I'm still biking everywhere.
Oh, yeah. No, well, I'm not going to bike anymore. Believe me, my knees won't let me do that.
Okay, low impact workout. Oh, that's too bad. I feel like that's the one thing. Well, maybe you can swim. I'm trying to think. Poor knees.
I do know how to swim. I've been swimming my whole life.
That's funny. You're in the land of. I know that there's a Gus Ryder pool in this neighborhood. Gus Ryder trained Marilyn Bell, and a guy who's Lumsden. What's it? Cliff. How can I forget? Cliff Lumsden. These are local legends. Marilyn Bell, Cliff Lumsden, and Cliff Lumsden Park is at 5th Street and the lake. And Gus Ryder, again, that pool's in South Etobicoke. But you're in the right place for the open water swims.
Right. And where do I swim to?
Well, I'm thinking this, from Marie Curtis Park to Sunnyside. There's your swim here. I'll be in a kayak beside you to get you.
Right. Will you be wearing your CBC T-shirt?
Hey, what do you think? So I actually was thinking, often when somebody who's had a great career at the CBC, or maybe not so great, I wear this vintage 1976 CBC shirt, which doesn't breathe very well. It's pure polyester, but
really,
I got it from a guy who worked at TV Ontario, because I guess for the Olympics in '76 there was this joint. They worked together, TV Ontario and CBC. So everybody got these shirts, and his was in his closet. And he's like, "I think you might appreciate this more than I do." And I often wear it, but today I'm wearing the faux retro. So this one's not. It's faux retro.
Oh,
CBC
I hope
t-shirt.
It's cotton.
This one breathes much better, I think.
With that logo that you're wearing, we called that the exploding pizza.
Okay, you call it the exploding pizza. I called it the exploding asshole. But
oh well, some people I'm sure said that as well.
Yeah, I wore that for you. So why did you decide? And I have a few more as it happens questions before we get to the book. But why did you decide to leave the CBC and as it happens in 2022?
It was, I spent 16 years doing that. I clocked in, I think, 25,000 interviews. Wow. And I was tired. And I think COVID had a lot to do with it, going to the CBC every day for those years where there were 5 of us in the whole building. We didn't see people, just trying to get that show on the air every day. It was exhausting. I think a lot of people wore out during that time, and I was among them. I just thought, I need a break. I need to do something else.
And you got to walk away on your own terms. This isn't the infamous tap on the shoulder we hear about often on this program. Right? You didn't get a tap, but you decided, I'm out of here.
No, nobody did. No, they would have kept me there forever. But I knew that just eventually, when you feel. Every day I went to As It Happens. Every day I worked, I loved it. Every day felt new to me. Every story we did felt fresh. I just climbed inside every interview and found something that I didn't know was there. And then I was getting at the end of it where I didn't feel that way. I felt I was repeating myself. I wasn't as curious, and that scared me because my whole life curiosity is key to my existence, and I felt my curiosity waning.
And that's when it felt like a job, right? Like that's when it transitions. I totally relate. Like I think, and again, this is not the CBC. You might have noticed this is not quite the CBC, but I feel like the moment I'm not excited that Carol Off is going to be at the door and we're going to chat about As It Happens in her new book. Like if I'm not into that, now it's a job, and maybe I should do something I have more passion for.
Yeah, and that's the book itself. The idea for it started kicking around in I just couldn't get it out of my head for the last few years that I was at CBC, and just thinking about how language was breaking down, how angry people were, how how adversarial conversations became. I'm an aggressive interviewer. I just I take no prisoners kind of questions, and people knew that. They knew that they were going to have that when they talked to me, and they respected it because we both had a job to do. But I started finding that it was just not that anymore. People were just, not only did they hate you, they hated the questions, they hated everything about what you represented. And I just felt I was shocked at how quickly the conversation, the social conversation was breaking down. And I thought, if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to write a book warning about where this goes.
Was there any correlation? I'm just naturally curious. Was there correlation in this like lost art of civil conversation coinciding with the election of Donald Trump in 2016?
I think it started happening before that. I found that during the years of Stephen Harper's government, it was increasingly antagonistic to talk to anybody, and I'd never encountered that before. I'd interviewed everyone in Brian Mulroney's government. I'd interviewed many conservatives, many people in different parties, Republicans, and even if we didn't agree, they didn't like the questions, they knew we both had a job to do, and there was a kind of mutual respect that we're both trying to get something across to the public. And then I started finding that wasn't the case, that there was just this antagonism, and it was wearing. And so you couldn't get answers, you couldn't get the truth, you couldn't challenge anybody without it becoming a struggle. And so I started finding that even before Donald Trump. Donald Trump just sort of caught the zeitgeist of that rather than created it. And he didn't create this breakdown in our civil society. He rode on it. He rode on the coattails of that and became its champion.
Okay, more on this. But at what point in your career, so many years at the CBC, and as you can tell by the T-shirt, I'm a CBC fan here. I consume a lot of CBC and have for decades. But when did you start to realize, on the far right, they're making us to be the enemy? Like, they're making us to be the bad guys. Like, when did you start to notice that seeping in?
Well, it wasn't just CBC. It was independent media in general. And I think what we've seen trending through all time through politics is that when the only way you can get to have power without being challenged is to get rid of the media, to get rid of journalism, to have no independent sources of information. And so we began to see that with sort of this move toward the populist leaders, demagogues, not just in the United States, but in many countries. They're just trying to break down the whole business of journalism, of reporting, of independent voices. Because once you've done that, you can tell people anything. Once you have separated people, discredited the profession that you and I are both in, once nobody trusts you, then you can say anything you want to and unfiltered and get your message across. All of it amplified now by social media.
Right. Now, of course, you're right that it is all independent media, not just CBC. But the difference being, of course, that the CBC is taxpayer funded, and the mistruth, and we're going to get into this book in great detail, and the words and what they mean and how that affects the lack of civilized discourse. But the CBC funded by the government, the lies that come out of the far right is that there's political interference, like that the Trudeau government, for example, would have some kind of editorial rights, some kind of interference. But when did was that always in place? I mean, Harper was in government for like a decade. And I don't remember hearing anybody suggesting that Harper was influencing the reports we would hear on CBC.
Well, I don't think it's got really anything to do with what they perceived was going on with the CBC. It was the idea that the CBC was effective, and all independent media that's effective is going to be a target for people who want to have exclusive dibs on the public and not have anybody asking questions, challenging them. So I think that the degree to which you are effective is the degree to which you are attacked by by demagoguery, by those who say we need to get rid of you because the public is listening to you. And I think the CBC was effective. And first of all, the CBC is not the only because it's not funded by government; it's funded by the public. There's a difference.
Correct.
And plus, in addition to that, much media is funded, gets grants, gets tax breaks, gets funding. In fact, CTV, if you added it all up, probably gets as much as the CBC because it's supported. And that's really important in this country because we're up against multinational corporations now who are putting out the social media platforms where they're antagonistic to the truth, not just that they don't publish the truth. And Canadians are not well served, not just by CBC National or as it happens, but just locally, just small communities where you can't find out about local sports. You don't know what's happening at the school board. You don't know what's happening in your community because there is no more media there. It's all drying up, and that's the most dangerous thing that's going on in this country.
Should Hamilton have its own CBC outlet?
I think that, yes. I can't think of a community that shouldn't have, and not just CBC. Hamilton deserves to have a lot more independent media, a lot more voices and diversity, not just CBC. But when you talk about what no one ever says that you're being biased in favor of the Conservatives. I know for a fact that people who are reporting for Post Media are told you cannot say anything good about Trudeau. You have to. It's the editorial policy of Post Media.
Well, I think it was Canada Land that leaked the memos where it was in ink. You could read sort of this is how we're going to get the progressive Conservatives elected in this province.
Yeah, and so you have a situation where you have an entire media landscape that is dedicated to getting rid of a political party, a government. And at the CBC, I can say anything I want about Trudeau in an interview like this, not as a host, but I can criticize the Liberal government, I can criticize the Conservative government, and both of those critiques will end up on the air. If I criticize the Conservative government to Post Media, it won't show up. So where is the bias?
Right. Very interesting. Now, just to put a bow on As It Happens, so we can focus primarily on the book here. I heard you say 25,000 interviews.
Yeah.
So what am I at? Like 1,500 and something interviews on this show, but I'm counting like every time I drop it. Yeah, I'm catching up. Give me another couple of centuries. But every time I drop an episode, it gets its own number. Like I have a system where it's very easy. Like, so did you have like a sort of like an umpire in baseball? You're clicking this timer thing every time you clock another interview?
I just, during those last years when I was wondering why I was so worn down and why I wasn't curious anymore, I just sat down once and I just counted the numbers of interviews we did in an average day and an average week and then in an average year. And then added it all up, and I realized I'm into the mid 25s now,
right.
25,000 interviews and counting. And that's just 16 years as it happens. Over the course of 40 years of working in CBC and working in the media, I'd say it's probably another 10,000 there.
Well, that's remarkable. I can envision this like Google spreadsheet or something, and you've clocked the 25,000. I talked to this guy, and this farmer saw a UFO, and then you're just going down the list, and would love to see that Google sheet. Now, of those 25,000, do you have a most memorable interview? Like,
I knew you were going to ask this. This is
is that the standard question that you get?
No. This is the most embarrassing question that I get because I should remember them, but I really, when people say I love the interview you did such and such, and I'm thinking, right, I did that, didn't I? But no, I think as memorable goes, I think some of the goofy ones, of course, were the most fun. Just the ones where somebody, I don't know, a woman knits sweaters for chickens, or somebody makes earrings out of deer poop, and because they're really deer, those are really lovely people with people who very strange stories about sheep would always come up whenever we had a sheep show. We loved it. Mm-hmm. I would never miss an opportunity to say the word penis on air, which is there's a grade 5 default as it happens. Everybody just wants to say poo-poo and pee-pee on air. And so they would get me to do that, which then there was no difficulty getting me to use this kind of...
But good on you for using, you're on CBC, so you use the doctor words, as we say in this home, the doctor words, penis. I
often said penis and vagina. I never got to say vagina or vulva as much as I wanted to, but I did get
you can do it on this show. I did
scrotums and penises, and because people would make things like a lot of sculptures out of penises, or not out of penises, but make penis sculptures.
I think there's a museum I was at in Amsterdam for the penises.
That was one of our favorite pieces, was the Penis Museum, and it was in
Berlin?
No, it's in some Scandinavian, Sweden.
Oh, or is it Iceland? Is it
Iceland? Iceland has the Penis Museum.
I've been there, so I was like, but I've seen a similar penis museum in Berlin, and I saw one in Amsterdam.
What?
But, I know.
And I didn't get to do do that story on As It Happens?
Look, this is a
it's
top
killing
secret.
me.
Top secret is that I think I'm going to launch a penis museum review podcast. This is in store. So just
And have you ever talked penis on your show before? Is this the first time you've been able to say that word?
No, I've said penis many times, but I'm a little less mature than you, so I might have called it a dink or a wee wee. Who knows?
Oh,
I've got a
no,
thesaurus over here.
There, you can't do that on the CBC.
No,
but
no, that's fine. It's
as long
doctor
as,
words.
Yes, the doctor words.
Okay. And then from penis to something more serious, I'm always curious as a journalist who was working through, September 11, 2001. How does 9/11, does it change things in terms, like for you in your professional career as a journalist? Like, was that a moment where there's a before 9/11 and after 9/11? I'm just wondering, or is it this is just another massive global event that I need to cover?
I remember, because I wasn't at As It Happens, I was at the national CBC television at the time, and I remember the boss I had at that time was we watched what was going on that morning, and I was in Toronto at that time. A day like this, a beautiful day in September, and my boss said, "This changes everything," and I didn't understand what he meant. He was a very, very wise man, John Whitten, and it was true. Then I spent most of the next year on the road. I never really went home. We went from going to New York, going to see the site, talking to people there, covering that horror, to following where the story went from there to Afghanistan, to later to Iraq, to, Egypt. There were stories there around the world. And so basically 9/11 changed everything. It changed everything for me as a journalist, changed everything in the world as far as I'm concerned.
I can only imagine. So you weren't on the air 9/11. But you were at the National, like as a correspondent.
Yeah. I was working for the National, and
Right.
I did their much of their foreign documentaries, and so I was just dispatched that day to start covering the different angles on that story. And to call it a story it doesn't do justice. It was just a massive event in our lives. And we're still feeling the reverberations for that, aren't we?
Well, I always wonder, in some regard, is 9/11 a moment where we can tie it to your book? Like maybe post 9/11 is the beginning of the loss of words, if you will, like where we lose the art of civil discourse.
I'd say more a moment when I thought we've lost the art, where we're lost the conversation, where have abandoned ourselves to the fringe. The fringe has taken over. People who not part of the conversation and don't even want a conversation. I think it was January 6th when when those Trump followers, the MAGA supporters, stormed the Capitol in Washington. Watching that day, that to me was the moment when I truly felt that we had lost the plot as a civil society, and that this made sense to too many people, that this is what you should do, that you should actually storm this building, trash it, look for people to kill, go door to door in offices and to have the person who was still the president at that point egging you on to say, look for him, look for the vice president, a gallows, a makeshift gallows built outside ready to hang Mike Pence. This to me was, I thought, we'd seen it build, we'd seen this grow, but this is the first time I realized how bad things were.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if that was a fever dream. It's January 6th, 2021, but you're telling me it happened.
Well, and I think people remember where they were at that moment when they realized everything had changed. For me, that was really when this story, this book began to really shape up in my head, when I realized that we had to, and I have to say that I didn't think it was possible. I thought that by the time I got to be talking to Mike in his basement.
You've really made it now, by the way.
The CBC T-shirt with a very low ceiling that he has to keep warning me about. And that when I finally got to this place, that you would be saying, you're such a Pollyanna, Carol. You're thinking that it's that we're in this hopeless, that we can actually recover the conversation. We can actually start talking to each other when people are talking about killing each other. But now I actually, in the past couple of months, I've begun to feel more positive, more feeling that there is hope.
How much of that has to do with Kamala Harris?
It has everything to do with the Kamala Harris switch. Not because I don't know if she will win. I don't know if she'll be a good president if she does win. I just know that was the moment when I thought it's possible. We can still talk to each other. We can still engage. And I think that people felt the same. I don't think that you would have seen millions of people, tens of millions of people suddenly and instantly rally around her message about freedom if they hadn't been looking and waiting for this to happen. And I think you saw that there, and you're seeing it in Canada, where people they're calling it the politics of joy, and the feeling that we're not going to succumb to this anger, this resentment, this hatred, and this adversarial world that has been taken over by people and I have to say on the right, they have really stoked that. I felt that we've recovered the ability to talk to each other.
Okay, so the storming of the U.S. Capitol, that's January 2021, but in 2022, the Freedom Convoy, and this is when thousands of demonstrators occupied downtown Ottawa to protest COVID-19 restrictions. Is this yet, again, I'm thinking now specifically, I opened this show with a little Janis Joplin, okay? She's saying freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, just because I'm thinking of that being one of your words. So here, let's set the table by telling the people that the new book, which I'm holding in my hand and is available now, like today, right? Today's the day?
Mm-hmm.
Exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
This is my first interview today, too.
Is that right?
So this is great, yeah.
Okay, you're starting in the big leagues here. It's all downhill from here, Carol. But this book is called At a Loss for Words, Conversation in an Age of Rage. Interesting to me is that I had a bunch of stuff I was reading where it had a different title. So you must know this, that at some point this book was going to be called At a Loss for Words, Why Can't We Talk to Each Other? This was the title, right? At least this is the title. Anyways, maybe that was like an early draft.
I think
or
it's why we can't talk to each other. It wasn't a question why can't we talk, but why we can't.
Oh, right, it's a statement more.
But that felt too much like it was a self-help book, and so I think we decided that I'm not writing a self-help book.
Right. So you basically look at the manipulation and weaponization of language through the lens of 6 words: freedom, democracy, truth, woke, choice, and taxes. And again, a chapter on each of these words, very thorough, very interesting. But you would think we could spend a little time on freedom here. So freedom is a word that I see in this country anyways, that got co-opted by the convoy in 2022. By the way, Carol, I also feel they took our flag. So I remember in 2022, I would see a Canadian flag, and I always felt great pride seeing a Canadian flag. Born and raised in Canada, very proud of this country for the most part. But I would see the flag in 2022, and I'd feel like almost this feeling of like, ooh, like it's almost like you're seeing a F. Trudeau flag, or you're seeing some kind of
Well, it's usually on the same vehicle, right?
Yeah, so language we're going to dive into because that's what the book is about, but co-opting these, language and co-opting these symbols and kind of using it against you, we need to take it back, right?
Well, I think that the freedom word was key to that. And when I would be interviewing people or covering the story or watching it develop and in Ottawa on that very, very cold winter when the so-called Freedom Convoy took over and occupied the center of Ottawa, someone would just jump into the front of the camera and go, freedom.
Yeah.
And I thought, what is it you think that word means? And I felt the resentment of people who had actually struggled against tyranny, people who live in this country, who came from places, they came to Canada because they came from places that are not free. They came from places where you can't speak, where you can't have even an opinion, where you have no freedom, and they come to a country where here, if you can drive 116 wheelers up to the front door of government, set up your bouncy castle and hot tubs, and occupy the capital for a month. What freedom do you feel you don't have? And they would say in those moments, we're taking our freedom back. Well, what's the freedom? Yeah. The freedom to do what? What is it you're missing in your life that you consider? And obviously it came down to that point, COVID. They felt that They didn't have the freedom to go anywhere without a mask, the freedom to go into a restaurant and order without, restaurants were closed for the most part. They had lost the freedom of movement. And I thought, well, I don't want to lose the freedom to not be infected by a disease that at that point had killed 50,000 people in Canada alone, and in the end, 1 million people in the States. We wanted the freedom to be safe. We wanted the freedom to have our kids and our grandparents and whoever else not vulnerable to a disease that was spreading like wildfire. And the argument was we want to be free to do whatever we want. We want to be free from the responsibility to others. And that's when I felt that this word freedom has been co-opted by the convoy and again also just a year earlier by the January 6th.
So when a movement like that co-ops a word like freedom, like how do we reclaim it? Like how do we reclaim it? Are these people going to read your fine book? And
I you know what? I was shocked that Kamala Harris is doing it. The entire theme of her campaign, what's her theme song? Beyonce's Freedom. What's the word freedom is, if you count the numbers of times it appears, every time that Tim Walz or Kamala Harris speaks, that they say freedom in almost every paragraph. And you hear no talk of freedom on the part of the MAGA conservatives. You hear no Republicans talking about freedom. They talk about how the country is broken and how we need to take control. We need to control what books you're reading in the library, and we need to control what gender your kids have. We want to control marriage. We want to control all these things. And so you have the opposite. The narrative is flipped, and you have Republicans, MAGA Republicans, talking about taking your freedoms away, and you suddenly have these people that are often accused of being socialists, who are the ones who now own the word freedom. And so, no, I'd love if Kamala Harris read my book, but I think that they claimed this word, they took it back in a way that I didn't think was possible when I was writing this book.
Amazing. They're also redefining the word weird, because Carol, I always like the word weird, and I'm a little weird, and I always think weird is a little, like,
I know.
Typically it's interesting. It's not a bad thing, right? Like maybe you're not typical. You've got a few, I can't even say that word. Thank you.
Okay, we've lost weird. We're not going to get weird back.
I think we should, maybe I'm going to write the book on reclaiming the word weird.
Maybe it's a worthy sacrifice for a good cause.
Because I don't like how weird has become a bad thing. And again, no. I hope, I'll be honest, I hope Kamala beats Donald Trump. I would like to get rid of Donald Trump. I heard him say the other day, you touched on this, but I heard him say, maybe it was yesterday, it was on social media, your kids are going to school, and then the teachers are putting them into surgery for like gender reassignment or something.
And they come back, the kids come home having had surgery and lost their body, right. and now they have a different gender.
They won't walk my kid to a park a block away until I sign like in triplicate.
It's just how anyone believes this, but they do. They actually believe this is what happens. That I've heard interviews, I've heard streeters at MAGA conventions where people say absolutely astonishing things, and you can't think, honestly, that's not happening. It's not true. It didn't happen. But this another one that they say is that a woman can have an abortion of a newborn baby. The baby's born,
right, which is no longer an abortion. That's murder, right?
It's murder. And that women are doing that all over the States. They're killing their babies. And so you go, okay, give me one. And there's someone online who's actually on Twitter saying that he will pay $10,000 to anyone who can come up with a single name of that happening. And but Donald Trump says that everywhere he goes, that women are killing their babies. They're aborting their babies after they're born. And I've heard streeters who people think that's true.
And it's up to, people like you to help us, at least the start, I guess, towards civilized conversation is if we can all agree on the meanings of these words and the words that you focus on. Again, freedom, democracy, truth, woke, that's another one I like to talk about, choice, and taxes. Like some of these words have been co-opted and their meanings changed, but if we can all agree on what they mean, then we can have a civilized discourse. I personally am happy to talk to, somebody in my friend circle is a big Pierre Poilievre fan. We're going to get back to him in a minute. I am more than happy to have a conversation. It's like you're not dead to me, and I would like to chat with you about it, but civilized discourse.
Well, I think that that's what the biggest problem is that we can't have these conversations because the fringe, the people, the extremists, the ideologues have taken over the conversation. I think that there is a frustrated middle. There's a whole bunch of us in the middle, like you and me probably, who can listen to either side, would like to hear both sides,
Sure.
like to hear your argument,
Absolutely.
like to hear what you, but not to have the conversation shut down because you just won't listen. And I don't think it's just a matter of being able to say what you want to say with freedom, and it's a matter of listening to others, really listening to what others are saying, and that has stopped. Both the conversation on both ends has stopped, and yeah, I think that we need to be able to have that. We need to be able to open that conversation again.
Absolutely. Now, before we get any further, Carol, because this is not the CBC, and I've heard this complaint, guests come over and they're like, when I do the CBC, it's a good conversation, and then I leave empty-handed. But Carol, could I give you some gifts for making the trek here? And I'm honored to have you here. Been a long time listener. Now you're an FOTM. That means friend of Toronto Mike. Do you, Carol, enjoy Italian food?
Yes, actually.
Okay, good. I appreciate the honesty. Good.
I was wondering about this pizza that was sitting, palmapasta.com that's sitting in front of me. I'm now
you.
to respond to that, right? But there's a green thing sitting on top.
Okay,
I haven't got my
multiple
glasses
gifts coming your way. So the green thing is a measuring tape, and that is courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home. We shout out Ridley Funeral Home on this program. Pillars of the community. You never know when you have to measure something. So now you have measuring tape from Ridley Funeral Home.
Can I measure how long this interview's been?
Go ahead. Okay, you can measure anything you like.
Seemed really... There it goes.
It works. The pizza is actually going to be a lasagna, and it is in my freezer right now. The box is empty.
Is an
So
empty box.
before you leave, a lasagna will be in that beautiful red box, and you'll have delicious palma pasta lasagna.
Oh, I got a mug from As It Happens.
Okay, a mug. I would like an As It Happens mug. I'd put it in the
If I had
museum
known,
here.
I would have brought, because I have so many now, and I could have brought you the one I've got.
Dun 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 dun. That's the Mo Kaufman version.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. Okay. When I actually asked Ill Vibe, who's a local rapper producer, I said, hey, I need a theme song for this podcast I want to start. This is 12 years ago, I should tell you. And I said, yeah, I'm looking for like a modern, more hip-hoppy kind of As It Happens theme. Like that was literally what I asked for. I'm like, this is the song they use on As It Happens. I kind of dig that vibe. Hip-hop it up, do a few verses, and let's see what you come up with. And that's the Toronto Mike theme I've had for 12 years.
That's lovely.
Thank you. Fresh craft beer from Great Lakes Brewery. Okay, they brew that in Southern Etobicoke here.
It's not chilled.
No, it's not chilled, but stick that in the fridge and enjoy it. And by the way, what neighborhood? You don't have to dox yourself, but what neighborhood do you call home?
Toronto.
Okay, like West End.
East.
East. Okay, so these guys are in Southern Etobicoke, but you can buy their fresh craft beer all across this fine province, and they have a location also at they have a brew pub at Jarvis and Queens Quay. So maybe make your way there, have a nice lunch, enjoy some fresh craft beer. So you're taking some home with you.
This is amazing, and you never get this at CBC. You're right.
No, you never. I mean, Tom Wilson from Junk House is down here, and he's like, "Yeah, I do. I can't do a Tom Wilson impression. Okay, I was gonna try to do one, but
Don't.
I do a lot of CBC. I don't get lasagna. He just comes by for the lasagna now. So
Right.
last but not least, welcome back to the program, Raymond James, the Advantaged Investor podcast hosted by Chris Cooksey. That's where you get your best practices, your good financial advice. Subscribe to that podcast. And Carol, if you have any old electronics, old devices, or old cables at home in the East End there, please do not throw that in the garbage because those chemicals end up in our landfill. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca and put in your postal code, and you'll find a place near you. You can drop it off to be properly recycled.
Excellent.
Now, we talked a bit about the Freedom Convoy. Did you make the trek to Ottawa to check it out, or you watched it from afar?
I could not go to Ottawa because I was having to stay in the studio. So, no, I watched it, recorded it from there.
Okay, so Pierre Poilievre marched with the Freedom Convoy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm just wondering how, because, in this country, they've got to go, what's going on down south is very interesting, and we watch it because it matters. They have a great effect on our day-to-day. But up here, we have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at some point there will need to be a election, and if you believe the polls, it looks like the Conservative Party will form the next government. I'm just wondering how Pierre Poilievre compares to the Donald Trump populist alternative facts methodology in your eyes.
I've heard people comparing Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump. There's just no comparing. Donald Trump is in a league of his own. There's just such an extreme example of a demagogue, of somebody who is a dictator in waiting. And Pierre Poilievre is not like that. I think that Pierre Poilievre has learned the language, the rhetoric of us against them. He plays the demagogic language well. He talks about that that he is the one who's going to save people. He is the strong man who will resist the woke mindset or the woke radicals, and that he is the one who will stand up to the gatekeepers and he rage farms. That's the other successful thing that populists do. But I think that when we talk about the Freedom Convoy or all these things, that a lot of people were opportunists, and Pierre Poilievre joined that opportunity to look like he was a champion of the Freedom Convoy. A lot of people at that convoy, a lot of people who are part of that kind of movement, are people who feel insecure. And so we can't forget that there are a lot of people who just genuinely feel insecure right now for really valid reasons in this country and in the United States. But let's just stick with Canada. And I think what Pierre Poilievre does is that he plays on people's insecurities. He amplifies them. He says, I'm going to save you from that. On the other hand, what I hear from the Liberals is that they basically ignore your insecurities. And so I think that we're failed. We have, and the Liberals say, well, look at the data. Look how well we're doing as a country. And all of it's true. On paper, Canada's doing really well. But that doesn't mean that you feel that security within your own life, within your house, within with the cost of living or the cost of groceries. And so you have these two parties right now. You have Justin Trudeau, who doesn't seem to care about your insecurities, and you've got Pierre Poilievre, who preys on your insecurities and amplifies them. And so we're basically stuck with a technocrat versus a demagogue. And these two men seem to be determined to get in the ring and duke it out with each other. And I feel that we're left behind. We're in the middle, this sort of people who have genuine feelings of insecurity, genuine needs to seek leadership, people with imagination, people who are not rage farming, people who are not trying to stir up our emotions and turn us against each other and against society. We don't have anybody who's doing that right now on either side.
And there's something to be said about a governing party that simply reaches its best before date, like it expires. Like I feel like this happens, whether it be Mulroney's government or Chrétien's government or Harper's government, that the Liberals have been in power for, I guess it's been about it'll be 10 years by the time we probably have an election, and that Canadians, the general will, the zeitgeist decided it's time to change things up.
I've never understood this argument, it's time for change, as being a reason to get rid of a government. But at the same time, the Liberals just seem tired. They actually do have good policies. They actually do have good ideas. But they're just hopeless at explaining them to us and getting us to say, well, you just trust us. We're doing the best for you, and that may be possible. But I just don't feel that they just look bored. Whenever I see a Trudeau cabinet minister, a Liberal cabinet minister, speaking about a policy that might actually be interesting, they're not interested in it. They seem bored, or they seem resigned to this idea that they're going to be losing in the next election.
I feel this, Carol. I feel that exactly. I feel like some people are like, oh, why doesn't Trudeau step down and put some like new blood up there? And I'm feeling like, okay, maybe this is like, how Kathleen Wynne didn't step down when it was clear that Doug Ford's government was going to form the next provincial leadership party. I think maybe Trudeau goes down of the ship to kind of save somebody from this fate.
Oh, I just think he's so determined.
He seems so resigned, though.
But he seems so determined to duke it out with Pierre Poilievre. Those two men have a hate on for each other, and they want to fulfill that in this election. And I'm feeling what do we get out of that? But I think that the Liberals just look and feel tired, and on their own by their own efforts, not by us saying simply, we want change. I don't want, I just want things to be better. I just want people to feel secure. And I don't think that either party is encouraging that at this point.
Now, in our last 10 minutes here, I realized I had a question from a listener, and I really want to get this in, although I did kind of touch on this earlier, so I feel like I've stolen her thunder. But Leslie was curious, in your opinion, Carol, where this rise in populism comes from. I was hinting later, does it start with Donald Trump in 2016? And you said it predates that. So if it predates Trump, do we have an idea of when this current populism starts to rise in this on this continent?
Populism has always been with us for many decades, and populism is not dangerous in itself, but the elements of populism, the rhetoric of populism, can turn to authoritarianism really easily, and because populism uses the language of the demagogue. It uses the us against them language. Adversarial anger, resentment of others, fear of others. That's what populism plays on. And that's the basis for, how the Hitler and the Third Reich came to power. They played on that feeling of anxiety people have, their fears, played into it for a decade before they even came close to having power. And we see it in totalitarian regimes on the left and the right, where they begin with this talk of, I'm the strong man. I will take care of you. I will protect you from the evil other. It's never defined, right? It's always, quite often, well, for the Nazis, it was the Jews, right? But I'll protect you from the other. I'll protect you from the bad elements. And people feel that, and so they get sucked into that. And then they only realize what a problem it is after it's too late.
I was reading that you volunteered with Journalists for Human Rights to help Afghan journalists escape from the Taliban. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that. That sounds very interesting.
I spent a fair bit of time in Afghanistan, and I have many friends, journalists and friends from Afghanistan who are now here because they've had to flee the Taliban. And so when the Taliban retook Kabul just 3 years ago, I'm actually president of Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, but we joined with Journalists for Human Rights to rescue people as best we could. And it was just a crazy time of trying to get people out of that country before they disappeared. And we were somewhat successful, but not as much as I'd like to think we could have been.
But good on you. That's amazing that you did that. Now, quick hits here. Any thoughts, Carol, on what's happening with global news these days? As a Chorus is, I was reading, they're in rough shape. I think there's a fire sale going on right now with any Chorus property you're interested in. They've been decimating global news as a result of these cost cutting. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, CTV just did it. Bell Media did it before them, and CBC continues because it's publicly funded, but I think if you talk to anyone at the CBC, they just feel that that's going to be decimated as soon as Pierre Poilievre, who promises to dismantle the CBC, is in power. I think that the media landscape in Canada in general is in real trouble, and it's not just Global or Bell Globe Media or Bell Media or CBC or whatever. It's the thing that upsets me the most is that the small communities that are not served, and we're seeing a lot of small operators starting businesses. We see online newspapers. We see things like you doing interviews like this in your basement, and I think it's wonderful, but it's not enough, right? You can't. It's hard to support yourself. I'm sure you have great advertisers, but it's really difficult to stay afloat. And so I can't speak to what I think Global is going to do, but it's just an example of lots of media going in this direction because there's just no money in this. The money is being sucked out by the big tech platforms who are multinational corporations with absolutely no interest in telling you where the scores of the local teams or and what's happening at the university and what and reporting on the
city council
city
for
council
any city not named Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver.
Yeah. And so we're not. Believe me, Elon Musk is not going to. Doesn't care at all about your city council meetings. No one in Facebook, none of these organizations. And so you say, oh, Facebook, you can get a Facebook page. Well, yeah, you can, but that's not the same thing as having somebody go down and report on it and tell you what's going on.
For sure. Now, you did just touch on it, because if Pierre Poilievre is elected prime minister in this country, and it's possible, maybe probable, what is the future of CBC? I know you don't have the crystal ball with you. I was checking to see if you brought your crystal ball, but he has pledged, I think, to defund the CBC. What does that mean for the CBC at a time when we need it most, in my opinion?
Well, it means that it's going to suffer. The only way that I think you can push back on what Pierre Poilievre says he's going to do is if the public says that they don't want that to happen. And so I worry that my colleagues and my friends at the CBC are dispirited. They feel that that they're facing the demise of this amazing institution that has existed for decades and has been been the lifeblood of people's homes and of their knowledge and information and their connection with each other from coast to coast to coast, et cetera, and that the public is sort of feeling, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. We can't stop this. I think, Mike, one of the biggest the problems is that people feel resigned to this idea that they can't change anything, they can't turn anything around, that yes, Pierre Poilievre's going to get rid of the CBC or dismantle large parts of it. Yes, we're going to not have local news coverage because big tech media is going to overcome all of that. We're not going to be able to afford to buy a house. We're not going to be able to do anything we want to do. And I feel this resignation in this country. And I think people felt that way in the United States. And that's why I think what Kamala Harris represents is the sudden idea that no, we don't have to give into this. No, it's not over. No, we don't have to succumb to the worst ideas and losing the things that matter to us. And so I think that the politics of hope is the one thing that I now turn to that gets me up in the morning, that maybe we're not going to see some of the worst things. Only if the public says no. You have to stand up, get up on your hind legs and say, I don't want this to change. I don't want this to go. I want this conversation to continue, and I want it to happen on the CBC and in other media across this country.
I needed this pep talk personally because I feel that the Conservative Party nationally and even the Progressive Conservative Party provincially, I feel neither really cares about getting Toronto's vote. Like, my feeling is that my thoughts and my feelings in this city, which happens to be Canada's largest city, but they can win without Toronto, and they're not really trying to get Toronto's vote. It's almost like they've decided they're not going to get Toronto's vote. They don't need Toronto's vote. So my voice doesn't really matter. This is a feing I have.
But that's the argument that has been presented itself in every election that I've ever covered for 4 decades, that Toronto is not necessary, or Toronto is dominating it, and Toronto decides, and the rest of us outside of Toronto don't get to influence these elections. That's always an argument. Big cities and rural communities. But what's really interesting? In the United States, they are having these, they call it, I think, the sort of the anti-rage movement. And so these small communities are joining with people in large communities, in large cities, to have these meetings, to have these councils, to have these gatherings where they talk to each other about, let's share our experiences. And so people a farmer who is very, very right-wing and Republican is then sitting down in a room with somebody who's from the LGBTQ community of a big city and listening to each other, like really deep listening to each other. This is a movement that's these little knots of this movement are across the United States. And someone called it the Kumbaya industrial complex. We're going to sort of turn this around by just going back to the conversations that will bridge these divides, that we'll be bridge builders and not destruction engineers, right? And so I think that's happening in the United States in small small movements, and I think that can happen here. We can start talking to each other again.
Well, here's hoping. Here's hoping. And I am glad you wrote At a Loss for Words.
Thank you.
So thank you for writing this book. They announced Charles Adler is going to be a senator. Oh, Carol Off, senator? How would you like that?
No, Charles Adler's going to be a senator? That's wonderful.
Yeah, that was announced a couple of weeks ago, but I was thinking Carol Off for senator. So I'll start that campaign for you if you like. And we didn't mention his name. I realized off the top we made a joke that you're married to a guy with 10 Gemini Awards.
Oh, yeah.
Lyndon McIntyre, how's he doing?
He's great. He's got a book coming out in the fall, and I think he should be on Toronto Mike.
Oh, look, that's where I'm going with this. Will you, I'm curious, how was this experience? You've got 25,000 interviews under your belt. I know they don't normally go this long, but how was this for you? And will you recommend to Lyndon that he make a Toronto Mike appearance?
You want me to measure this one?
How do I measure up?
You
Carol?
measured up
That's
really
what I'm
well,
asking.
Mike.
Okay.
And I got all these gifts. No, it was a very good interview. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,545th show. You can follow me all over the place. I'm at Toronto Mike. So if I'm going to send people somewhere, are you on social media, Carol?
Yes.
Where would you send them?
I'm on Twitter or X. Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to just find them all, just www.caroloff.ca. So
caroloff.ca. I'll be tagging you in all those social media places when I post this, which will be in about 10 minutes because I'm not editing a word. That's the other big difference between your interviews and mine. No edits for brevity. What did they say? For brevity or whatever. All right.
Clarification, right.
Much love to all who made this possible. That is Great Lakes Brewery. Don't forget to bring home that craft beer. It's Palma Pasta. I've got the lasagna in the freezer. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Raymond James Canada. And of course, that measuring tape is courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home. See you all tomorrow when Kate Wheeler returns to the show. We'll find out what she thinks about these chorus cuts at Global News. She was there recently for many years. See you all then.